The United Kingdom government has declared that he has no preferred presidential candidate amongst those contesting to replace President Muhammadu Buhari in the next year's elections. Speaking with journalists yesterday in Abuja, after a closed-door meeting with members of the National Working Committee, NWC, of the APC, led by Senator Abdullahi Adamu, the British High Commissioner, Catriona Lang, said that the UK government was committed to free and fair elections in the country. She said the meeting with the National Executive of the APC was one of the meetings she has been having with political party presidential candidates and their party chairmen ahead of the 2023 elections. A lot to talk about this. The UK says we're supporting nobody.
Yes, and very good that they've come out to say that following the closed-door meeting with the National Working Committee of the All Progressives Congress, in attendance were obviously some of their members there and the chairman, national chairman of the party, Abdullahi Adamu. It's very interesting that when it comes to elections in Nigeria, the UK traditionally in recent times have come out with statements around how they hope to support the electoral process. Now, when it comes to foreign electoral intervention, you could have it in two ways. It could be partisan, where countries, outside countries would, or foreigners would choose to go with a particular, stand with a particular political party in a foreign country, or as in the case of the UK in this conversation have said they're going with a process foreign intervention, whereby they are willing to support the electoral process in that country. Now, earlier in November, the British High Commissioner had come out to also talk about what they had done in support of Nigeria's electoral process and what they hope to do in the coming days, months, weeks, really, leading to the February and March electoral processes. First off is that they were quite vocal in saying that they supported the Electoral Act in terms of funding through legal advisory. They've talked about how they've upskilled some civil society organizations, Yaga being one of them, and young people as well. They've also talked about the interventions through visa sanctions for electoral violators, so people who are part of violence during elections, and this still holds for the February and March 2023 elections. If you're found caught in electoral violence, then they would sanction you and you would not be given visa to access their country. Bearing in mind the close trade and otherwise relation that Nigerians enjoy with the UK, this has proven, previously to be quite effective. And so to have her come out following this meeting to also talk about the fact that they talked about security of lives and properties during election is quite powerful. And the hope now going forward is that they would have such conversations beyond the APC and with other political parties, especially those who have presidential candidates, and even in particular the front runners, the NNPP, Labour Party, and of course the PDP.
Dr. Batu?
Okay, I mean, the High Commissioner of the UK to Nigeria meeting with the executive of the APC, National Executive of the All Progressives Congress, and stating clearly that the UK does not have a preferred candidate in the matter. Well, yes, that should be noted because that's a principle in international law. Article 2, subsection 4 of the UN Charter, stresses the principle of non-intervention in the domestic affairs of a sovereign state, and that, it even prohibits any form of intervention that may be coercive, as we saw in the Nicaragua case or the Corfu Channel case, as it is talked about. So the principle in international law, either under the UN Charter or in the Vienna Convention, 1961, on diplomatic relations, is that the diplomat in the receiving state must maintain complete neutrality. But is this the truth? In reality, there have been many cases when diplomats try to intervene directly in the affairs of the receiving state. During the June 12, 1993 struggle, there were persons who objected, for example, to the U.S. ambassador at the time getting directly involved and taking sides in a conflict in Nigeria. So, that's something that is often referred to, that when, I think it was Mr. Walter Carrington, get involved. But diplomats are supposed to maintain complete neutrality, even if there are exceptions in this regard. However, this does not preclude the principle, this is beyond sovereignty now, of states, that have diplomatic relations supporting each other. And you could see that in this regard, the British High Commission was encouraging, the Nigerian state to ensure security, to also ensure that the election is free and fair, and that people are given the opportunity to make a free choice. Now, all of that is, diplomacy, as a way of encouraging, the Nigerian state and authorities. However, the other leg of it is that the international standard now is democracy. You see that the Western countries, since about the wave of democratization that began in the 90s, the international community, through also the instrumentality of the United Nations, and, if you come down to Africa, the African Union, have always, promoted democracy from the point of view of human rights, of open government, open society. And those were the things that, you could see as the subtext of, the High Commissioner's statement when he met with the APC. The third part of it, of course, is that we live in an international community, which, as I said yesterday, is governed by rules, by standards, by protocols. Many of these haven't been enshrined in a number of United Nations, protocols and principles, and states have a responsibility in that regard. And the subtle reminder here is that everybody that is involved in the democratic process in Nigeria must realize that the international community is watching. The international community is interested. That, as Katrina Lang pointed out, that Nigeria does well, that Nigeria continues to grow. So even if we say there's the principle of sovereignty and non-interference, no country is an island. And that is why the international community is involved in the crisis between Russia and Ukraine. As the international community will be involved, in any other issues that comes up, either from the point of view of moral situation, whether it is Zimbabwe or it is Uganda or it is, any other country of the world. So, I find what she said very encouraging. To say, yes, we will not interfere. Yes, of course. They cannot do so openly in any way under international law.
I mean, you don't expect Katrina Lang to say anything apart from what she said. Diplomatic speak, they'll not interfere, and definitely she'll say that. And when you look at it critically, as stated, Dr. Bati, based on the foreign conventions, I mean, you can't come and say you want to take a side in a local election like this. But what you can do, as foreign diplomatic nations, that have affiliations with us can do, is to be able to sort of like, enforce the fact that the process must be upheld in its full sanctity and across board. And in fact, and that's why some arguments are even rife as regards June 12th and Walter Carrington, that his involvement was after the annulment and the fact that democracy was being threatened and America had to respond, in consonance with their own democratic values and all of that. Anyway, some people will argue against that, but that was the caveat there as regards to Walter Carrington case. But I'm not surprised that this is an ambassador is saying this. Let's even stretch it one foot further. If you remember the last elections we have, the 2015 elections between President Muhammadu Buhari and Goodluck Jonathan, it got very heated, neck and neck, that the Secretary of State of America, then John Kerry, had to fly in for a meeting with both top contenders in that election, because there were, harassment and things like that and violence. And that election was really heated. Let's not forget the Orubebe case, because it's as if we have selective amnesia too much in this country, and how the counting process was almost invalidated when Orubebe raised that alarm, and everybody was on tenterhook. The only thing that, doused tensions down then was because President Goodluck Jonathan made a call. And once that announcement was made that he had made a call and he had conceded, I still have goosebumps talking about that moment now. Then the country was safe from any disaster that will have happened. So the foreign community would just always advise. But also internally, what we should do is that we should make our processes better. How can we do it? Yeah, the British government, through their development agencies, the EU will give some money to civil society groups like Yaga Africa and everything, as regards, advocacy for the election laws and things like that, and they'll do all of that. But we too must make our processes better internally. How do we do that? Everybody should sign the peace accord. Yes, it's not constitutionally binding on anybody, but it's not fair when we can't even ordinarily sign a peace accord as regards making our elections better and peaceful. And we must also get to a point that we stop the West, and by growing up, we stop the West from babysitting us and looking after us. How many times do you have observers go to their own elections? Why is that? It's us they must always look after and babysit every time. So we must introspect. But she's, knock on wood, spot on by saying that the British government will not interfere. And I don't expect any government of any nation to be able to interfere in our elections. But also we should take learnings and do things better ourselves, because we have not done things better over the years. The fourth round of joint military talks between Nigeria and the French Armed Forces to strengthen existing defense collaboration agreements has opened in Abuja. The 5-day meeting at defense headquarters is attended by top military officers both from both countries. The team led by France Vice Admiral Christophe Lucas says Nigeria is a key stakeholder in regional security and important partner to France in West Africa. Nigeria is bordered by West African neighbors colonized by France. Now, Reuters news agency is reporting that the Nigerian army has been running a secret, systemic, illegal abortion program in the country's northeast since 2013. The news agency claims that at least 10,000 pregnancies were terminated among women and girls, many of whom have been kidnapped and raped by Islamic militants. Nigerian military leaders deny the abortion program ever took place.
Like I said, international community, they have their own issues. We all know. And it is for us to also find out what is their motive. Are they really here for humanitarian purposes? Because this allegation this guys brought about this abortion and all these things, we have told them in clear terms. In Africa, we even abhor it. We have gone to other countries, we've secured their own. Why should we come and do to our own people? For what? A kid coming in, it's not his problem. He wasn't the one who brought himself. So why should we want to go against him?
Right, Ayo.
All right, so this takes me back to just a few days after, a day or two after the NSAS protests, when the military, there was an investigation done, and even the weeks and months afterwards, and the Nigerian military came out to deny and say that it was false, it was fake news, it was false news. It's unfortunate that when we have reports like this from international organizations, it's just broken. And so in terms of what would come out of this, it would make more sense for the military to investigate, present their facts beyond just denials and, oh, it's not, we are bored. It's like we heard just a few seconds ago, we are bored, it's against our religion, tradition, or our culture, or whatever. And actually take some time to demonstrate to the Nigerian people fact to fact. Reuters have come up with an in-depth investigation. And so in responding to them, we want to see facts. It's just broken, and it would be great to see what would happen in the next few days in terms of their basis beyond just cultural reasons and how they respond to this investigation. But very, very damning report against Nigerian military.
Dr. Bati?
Okay, let me focus on France. There's been a lot of development, improvement in relationship between Nigeria and France since 1961, when the Tafawa Balewa government decided to break diplomatic relations with France as a result of the atomic bomb that was tested in the Sahara Desert, and which Nigeria thought was a threat to its own strategic interests. The second issue, of course, is that France has strategic interests in Africa, having been a former colonial power in many of these African states. And many of these states are Nigerian neighbors with which, Nigeria has very strong relations. Chad, Niger, Cameroon not too far away, Republic of Benin, and all of that. And the basic strain in all of this has been fear of Nigeria's dominance within the region. Sometimes there could be tension when we intervene in Mali. France takes the credit and all of that, but that's just the subtext of our relationship. However, in spite of that, France is also Nigeria is France's leading trading partner in sub-Saharan Africa. In the whole of Africa, you have Algeria, you have Morocco, you have Tunisia. In recent times, France has been trying to deepen its relationship with African countries. Hence, you have the African Summit. The only time in recent times that we didn't have that was during COVID-19. But now, post-COVID-19, there have been, stronger efforts both on the part of France and its allies in Africa to strengthen their relationship. And with Nigeria, we have France-Nigeria business relations. And that's understandable, as I said, Nigeria being the leading trade partner. But now, with the tension, with terrorism, with insecurity, which is a matter of international interest, and with France's own strategic interest within the West African sub-region. In the past few years, there's been a lot of talk about technical strategic partnership and technical cooperation to address the challenge of insurgency. Oftentimes, Nigerian leaders refer to the threat posed by the blowout in Libya, the crisis in Mali, in the entire Sahel region. We have Lake Chad Basin, we have Chad, we have Niger, we have, all these Francophone countries around us. And France, given its own strategic interests, continues to cooperate with Nigeria. And I think it's very fruitful. It's a very useful development. I will follow up, that we keep holding these meetings from the perspective of technical cooperation and strategic interest. However, the only caveat here is that oftentimes when Nigeria meets, engages in these bilateral efforts, we tend to drop the ball at our own end. We don't always follow through. We make commitments, we sign bilateral agreements, we put issues on the table. While the other party is pursuing its own interests, Nigeria often does not, follow through. And I think that should not happen in this case because insecurity remains a problem here. Terror, global terror and terrorism within West Africa or the Sahel region, is also a major threat to Nigeria. So this kind of cooperation between Nigeria and France is in order. We have similar agreements, similar, joint agreements and talks also with the United States, also with the United Kingdom. And it underlines one fact, that the fight against terrorism and insurgency is an international war that requires, international challenge that requires synergy, cooperation, and collaboration so that the entire, our world can be secure for everyone, no matter the geography.
France. Okay, so I'll quickly take on France. I mean, it even dates back, and I'm happy, Dr. Badi, talk about the historical antecedents of the 1960 incident that happened in Sahara. It even dates back to, I'll put a dot on it, 1898. After the Berlin Conference, this area of West Africa was so contentious between France and Britain. And obviously, France and Britain are always fought, if you remember the Fashoda incident and all of that, was so contentious that after the Berlin Conference, France and Britain didn't agree on the partitioning of most parts of the West, and that spans even up to northern Nigeria. So they had their own conference after the Berlin Conference, about 3 years after the Berlin Conference, 1898 to 1899, where they finally sorted some areas out because the French people have been coming to trade here. They had their naval boats called the Vertigo on our waters and everything, and they were fighting for trade and dominance around this area. So Nigeria has always been the eye of France. In fact, there are copious notes of France making incursion in some areas in the north back then. But when you look at what is happening today, there is that level of cynicism between Nigeria and France. And I'll point it out to you. Take, for instance, the monetary debacle that happened. France still controls most economies and monetary economies as regards most of these African countries it colonized. And Nigeria is here the big difference that it cannot get. You saw what happened recently when, as regards money in Cote d'Ivoire, that President Macron came into Cote d'Ivoire and said, okay, you know what, all the African countries colonized by France go a certain route as against Nigeria with the ECOWAS currency issue. Also, the fact that France has been here, it's not that they've not been here. And these collaborations are good if we can talk about it, but let's also forget that France set up an operation called Operation Barkhane. In 2012, that was at first to fight out the insurgents out of Mali. They got 1,000 troops into Mali, put them out there, called some other countries, Sweden, Estonia, and some other countries to provide technical support for military artillery. and they came out here, and they just left a couple of weeks ago in 2022. So they've been here, and also they've been disgruntled from what happened in Mali, and see how the Russians are making incursions in. So France talking to us now, it's great talk, don't get me wrong, but also, when we look at the antecedents, what is this talk about? Yes, security and all of that. Yeah, we had that under the G5 Sahel platform. But looking further, Nigeria, in terms of international diplomacy too, must be able to assert itself as a country, because we are indeed a big country and we have a lot of prospects. And that's why sometimes I shudder that our leaders don't get it right. If our leaders only knew how great this country was, how much it could be a superpower, they will stop all the shenanigans they're doing and face this country. Because if you put everything together and you cobble this country together properly, this country can be a superpower. And I don't mince words when I say it. So it's good we're having cooperation. We'll have cooperation with the rest. But what it also tells you in the grand scheme of things, that Africa is beginning to be another Scrabble point. Because the Russians are in the mix now. The French are in the mix now. Yeah, they're talking to us. They've always talked to us. But let's not forget that even with some of their colonial powers in Mali and everything, they're disgruntled. That's why they had to stop Operation Barkhane. What is in it for all of us in this grand international diplomacy? And that's why I keep saying 2023 elections matter. We must get a leader that have a good thinking cap, that can think of the greatness of this country and execute with plans and ideas. It might not necessarily be over 4 years or 8 years. It might be 10, 15 years, but can have a long-term plan. And Nigeria is deeper than political fault lines. A lot of people don't get it, right? And concerning the military case, let me just say this real quickly. It is incumbent on the Nigerian military to investigate that matter deeply. Look at it again. Because Reuters had very copious evidence in their interviews. And it was elaborate. They didn't just interview 1 or 2, 3 or 4 women. And they had a lot of people, and they documented the report, and they put it out there, and they put their name on it. And we've also had cases of Nigerian army having to deny and fight back. But Nigerian army too should be able to give a copious rebuttal and have an investigation that can look into what really happened and give our own side of the story. But yeah, denials and saying, okay, those were some of the Boko Haram fighters and everything. I don't know the context of the denial now. It's not just good enough. It has to be robust.
It's born out of wickedness. That's the
So
the
we need to put back a very good response, because we want this country to do well. And a good job our military, our soldiers are doing all of our fighting for the country, to save us, all of us. But also, when we have allegations like this, they must be able to tackle it head on, because this country is a great country and it's the best kept secret in the world.